Welcome everybody. Sorry for just jumping out there again. This is going to be demand video 3D for the 3 demand and 4D put together. And we're missing our assistants today. Corsley, our all-around genius assistant with all of the content and the slides and everything, and Jake, our photographer. Corsley's mother's not doing so well. Betsy's here, our producer. Thank you, Betsy. We always joke that, I joke that Betsy, I know not a joke, Betsy and Jake are about 100 times smarter than me, and Corsley's like 200 times smarter than. So anyway, she's taking care of her mom, and her boyfriend, Jake, and his girlfriend, they're all running some errands and visiting her at the medical center. So we're going to look a little bit hodgepodgey today, but I hope we'll work our way through it, focus on the concepts. And sorry if I mess up the videos a little bit. I'm going to try and do some of it myself. We got to keep Betsy in her booth. How much do we spend on that booth, Betsy? I don't know. Everything else is kind of like hodge, but well, anyway, welcome 3D and 4D today. Today we're going to talk a lot about the determinants of demand. When you change a determinant of demand, that causes a change in demand, the 3-word phrase, change in demand, and that is graphically illustrated by a shift of the entire demand curve. So we're actually going to practically draw the 4D graphs first, so you'll get a look at what they could be. It's either going to be an increase in demand, shift the demand curve to the right, or what do you think a decrease in demand is? Yes, decrease in demand, shift the demand curve back to the left. Does that make sense? Okay. And we'll see what the equilibrium results are. Remember those equilibrium kinds of things. We talked about them in that Apple video. Here's some of the list of the determinants. I have 2 Excel files for you. One will be a 3D Excel file with the list of the determinants, so you can just use that as a worksheet. Maybe every now and then write some stuff on the back, but mostly just circle some things and underline them, write in a couple of places. And then 4D is where you want to put the graphs. So I'm going to jump behind the camera for a moment. We're going to go over and do 4D next, but first I'm going to try to do an overview real quick. So this is where I mess up a bunch. Thank you for your patience. I'll be right with you here, and I'll keep talking. So what we want to do is recognize, hey, I'm Tommy. Whoop, see, I told you I was going to mess up. And we're still working on this demand and supply model. It's a little practical thing, demand in green. So you want to get some green and blue paper, blue for supply. This model is so amazingly important in economics, but in everything that we do in our lives, because so many of our economic activities use some type of model, market model, price system model, demand and supply model, free markets model, to try to allocate economic resources and help us make economic decisions, okay? So it's just pervasive with us, especially in the United States. We try to really lean on markets. They don't always work, and we have some other solutions we try to come in with, but anyway, we try to use markets as much as possible. And this is old school because I believe we got to draw a bunch of this by hand. If you draw this by hand, you will remember it your whole life almost, okay? Me being silly here, sorry. And this video is going to be called Demand 3D and 4D. You can tell Corsley's not here when you look at my writing. And sorry, a little close up. Here is the 3D handout. So on the top half, the determinants are listed on the left. Then how does that change demand? And then what happens to the graph? And we'll try and write in some notes for what happens on the 4D thing. And then here's 4D. There's a space for a graph on the left. Guess what? That's going to be when there's a decrease in demand. You shift the demand curve to the left. So we'll put that graph on the left-hand side of 4D. And then on the right-hand side, we'll do an increase in demand when you shift the demand curve to the right. So somehow that maybe hopefully makes sense. Back to 3D, on the top half, we basically have favorable or positive increases in the determinant of demand. And then I've italicized the suggested correct answer. Hint, 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 hint. And then I'm asking you guys to do the opposite on the bottom, right? Because what happens to the determinants is that they change in the opposite direction. So you'll get a look at that. And here's the 4 of the 8 determinants on the top half, right? The top half. And then down below, I'm going to pull these up myself, but there's the other 4. I'll just move them up as the video is going. And then here is the blank decrease in demand, shift left, and the blank increase in demand, shift right. But it'll look something like that. Sorry for aiming down below, right? Shift the demand curve from D1 to D3 for a decrease in demand. And then shift the demand curve to the right for an increase in demand, all right? So this is what we're going to do right now. We're going to draw these graphs as some background, and hopefully I will get lined up for you guys well. I think I got it. That's going to be pretty good, I think. And here I come. Okay, so we need the demand curve. We're going to have 2 demand curves, 1 supply curve. We need the demand curve to, excuse my glasses. We're going to draw the shell of the demand and supply model. Okay. First, we're going to try and say, well, Professor Tommy, what market is this? We always want to label the market. But 4D is going to be our general reference. So we're just going to say market for whatever we want it to be, right? We'll just leave it up there as a general reference, okay? And now we want to draw the shell. Here's the 0 point, right, where the axes meet. Oh, I forgot my arrow here. Remember? Quantity per period of time on the horizontal axis. Let's see if I can get a better one here. And then P for price expressed in terms of dollars. Okay, see if I can sneak into the shot here. Okay, so that's the demand and supply model shell. Now, we're having a change in demand, so there's going to be 2 demand curves. We're not changing supply, so there's only going to be 1 of those. So the next thing we always want to do is draw 1 supply curve. As we move from left to right, we haven't done the background on this yet, but you'll have to trust me. Supply curve will rise, and we'll label the S for supply up towards the top of the, right around the, lined up around the top of the shell, okay? Now, we don't want to draw the first demand curve way over here to the left, because when we have a decrease in demand, we need to shift the second demand curve to the left. So we practically have to give ourselves some room. So we're going to come out, start about the top, and have D1 for our first demand curve, okay? And we're going to label where they intersect. That's where we have this balancing equilibrium situation, you recall that? And then big P subscript PE1. Although we always say the E word first, equilibrium price 1. And what do you think about the quantities? Q for quantity, and then subscript E1, since we're coming from our first equilibrium quantity 1, okay? Now, second, we want to have a demand curve shift to the left. So practically, we're going to try and draw a second demand curve parallel, basically, roughly, it doesn't have to be perfect, to the first demand curve to try and just illustrate a decrease in demand. So we'll start about the same level at the top. Does that make sense? See if we can roughly draw something parallel just over this way a little bit. Now I use 3 for the decreases and 2 for the increase. The second one would be D2 when we do the increase, but D3 for the decrease. So here, we want to have an arrow that's horizontal, displaying the shift left. One at the bottom where the D's are, and one at the top to display the shift left. And then we just have to have a great imagination. If you have, there is computer graphic programs out there that make this all look great, but okay. So a new equilibrium will occur D1's no longer there, that's the imagination. At the intersection of D3 and supply curve S, which didn't change. So we have PE3, which is a decrease in the equilibrium price. And the new equilibrium quantity is equilibrium quantity 3, QE3, and that is to the left of QE1, so it is a decrease also. The equilibrium results of a decrease in demand are a decrease in equilibrium price and a decrease in equilibrium quantity, okay? So some determinant changed such that it caused a change in demand. The change in demand was directionally a decrease in demand. We graphically illustrate that by shift to left. So every decrease in demand will have these same results and the same graph will apply, okay? Let's go ahead and do the increase in demand. Okay, see if I can get this right. Once again, we'll draw the shell. Oh, let's do the mark. Marking for get our shell in there. Quantity per some time period in the horizontal axis. There's our origin, 0. Oh, here's my arrow again. Big P for price, expressed in terms P for price expressed in terms of dollars in the United States. Once again, we have a change in demand, so we're only going to have one supply curve. We'll draw that first. As we move from left to right, the supply curve rises. And we label the S up there. That's displaying a positive relationship between price and quantity supplied, because price is viewed by producers as revenue per unit. And that's a good thing when prices go up to the business. On the demand side, we want to have low prices, right? Okay, so our first demand curve has to be back to the left a little bit to give us room to shift the second one to the right. So we'll start about the top, call that one D1, and where they intersect, we'll move around in a perpendicular 90-degree angles, right? And that'll be our PE1, equilibrium price 1, and equilibrium quantity 1, okay? Our second demand curve will be to the right of the first to show the change in demand as an increase in demand. So we just move over to the right and draw D2 approximately parallel to D1 to the right of it. And then we draw horizontal arrows, one where the D's are and one at the top, pretending like we have a fancy dynamic thing going on here, which is what we do, and we're trying to display that. So D1's not there anymore. So what we're going to say, D2 intersects the supply curve here. So we move around in a perpendicular fashion in the Cartesian plane geometry space in the graph world. And we're going to label that PE2, which is an increase in equilibrium price. And from D2 and supply curve S, we go to the quantity axis to find QE2. And we also have an increase in equilibrium quantity and increase in equilibrium price. We usually say the price went first. So we would say the equilibrium results of an increase in demand are an increase in equilibrium price and an increase in equilibrium quantity. Whenever a determinant of demand changes such that it causes an increase in demand, this is the graph we have to think of, right? Prices are going to go up and more is going to be traded, right, when we have an increase in demand, okay? So there's a list of about 8 determinants of demand, and I'm going to make a quick shift on the video, and we're going to go over that list kind of quickly, but there's the picture of the graph that we wanted to keep in mind, okay? So you have that on your 4D, and you can use that as a reference, and then let's go through the list on 3D. So I'm going to do this rather quickly. I hope it'll be still working for you. I'm making sure I'm lined up all right. I think I got it. Okay, so the first one is listed as what happens with buyers' taste or preferences. If they change in a positive or favorable way, that's going to cause an increase in demand. Doesn't that make sense, right? If something becomes more fashionable this summer, right, in terms of literally fashion, right? Men's or women's fashion clothing or something along those lines. Any kind of product, sometimes entertainers have an impact on this, right? And so that more people will want to buy it. That in our model, that's called an increase in demand. We graphically illustrate that by a shift, right? And then out on our column, we would say the increase in demand may be, that's just a colon, increase in demand will be graphically illustrated by a movement from D1 to D2, just like we just drew in a moment ago. Now, what if you have a lot more people wanting to buy your product? Maybe you're selling right now in a certain region of the United States, and somehow you have been able to discuss with some people that you know from China about opening their markets, and there's a potential increase by a tremendous amount in the number of buyers. Well, if more people are going to be buying, that's going to be an increase in demand. Shift right, the increase in demand will be a movement from demand curve D1 to D2 in our graph to the right of 4D, right, the increase in demand graph. Now, the next two have to deal with income, and by definition, depends on what kind of good we have. If your income goes up and the demand for that good goes up, by definition, most goods are that way. That's called a normal good, okay? So if income goes up, and I'm just picking one, new cars might not be the case for you, but I'm just trying to use one, it may be a bunch of people think of as their income significantly goes up, right? Maybe they would go buy a new car for some of the members in their family or something like that. Normal good of new cars. So if income goes up, if the demand for that good goes up for new cars, then that's a normal good, and we would graphically illustrate that technically in the model by a shift right of the entire demand curve, shifting to the right, for example, from D1 to D2. Now, this is the phrase that's used in economics. I hate the phrase. Here I am getting myself in trouble again. You spend your hard-earned money on a good, I'm not calling it an inferior good. But by definitions in traditional economics, an inferior good is defined if your income goes up and the demand for that good actually goes down, okay? So different strokes for different folks, especially with demand, right, side of the marketplace. Some people will have their own choices here, but in general, I'm imagining, significant increases in your income, your family's income over time. Maybe some families that were struggling early on as they built their family, were in the used car market a bunch when they needed an extra car. Well, when they're doing great, maybe they only buy new cars. That's maybe not the case. Some people that are super rich will never buy a new car because they just like going out shopping for older stuff or something like that. Anyway, if used cars were an inferior good, what would happen is income would go up. That would cause actually a decrease in demand for used cars. That would be graphically illustrated by a shift left of the entire demand curve, for example, from D1 to D3 on the graph on the left, right, on your 4D. So there's the words. It's kind of this in a list and in the table like I have in our 3D. And then right away you want to go look at the picture on 4D that we just drew a couple minutes ago. Okay, here's the other four that are on the top half. See if I can line this up right. And then here's their corresponding changes. And I hope I didn't mess up too much. Let's see if I can line it up. Okay. Now these are tougher. The price of a substitute good and price of a complement good. And we'll come back and go over them again in some more videos. But if not everybody has this, but if Nike and Reeboks are substitutes for some people out there, if you increase the price of Nike dramatically, we don't know why. We're going to draw, and I would write on an essay question, I would say, please consider the Reebok market. Hint, hint, that means I want you to draw the Reebok market. Don't draw the Nike market, draw the Reebok market. That can be very confusing in multiple choice questions, but I'll just try to help you out that way. We only know the law of demand, right? If the price of something goes up, quantity of demand comes down, the amount that people buy. So people are going to buy less Nike. If the price of Nike goes up in a dramatic way, some people are going to buy less Nike. What would that do to the demand for Reebok? Well, consumers buying less Nike is going to increase the demand for its substitute Reebok, and then we go through the mechanics again. Graphically illustrate that by a shift right, for example, from D1 to D2 in our 4D graph. Now, what if goods are used together, complement goods? Now, this is not the perfect example, but one of the things people joke about with the SUVs using a lot of gas. Sometimes they get better and better every year, but they do use a bit more gas than some of the other smaller vehicles. Again, I would say consider the SUV market. That means, hint, I want you to draw the picture for the SUV market. How would the price of gasoline impact the SUV market? What if gas went from $4 a gallon up to $8 a gallon, or even $10 a gallon? Like very dramatic increase, just to try to illustrate it. Well, at some point, maybe not right away, but at some point, the quantity demand of gasoline would be coming down. We would start buying less gas. If a dramatic increase in the price of gas, quantity demand of gas comes down. If people buy less gas, they might, next time they're shopping for a vehicle, or even go trade the big old SUV in a little bit earlier, right? So the demand for SUVs would go down over time. We would graphically illustrate that, the mechanics of the demand and supply model, the market model, the price system model, right? The free capitalism, free markets model. Decrease in demand is graphically illustrated by a shift shift left of the entire demand curve. For example, from D1 to D2 on the left-hand side of graph 4D. Okay. Thanks for your patience, everybody. All right, what if your future income goes up? I always say, how about some of these people that are coming out of college sports, men and women, right? They're going to become professional women's basketball player, or they're going to become a first-round draft pick for the National Football League. Well, they're anticipating a pretty big raise in their income, right? Going from being a student to making millions of dollars a year. So if your income's going to go up in a dramatic way, what would happen to your demand right now? If you know you're going to get a bonus, right, at the end of the next month for this half of the year, you might go start spending that money, right? Increase your demand now. We graphically illustrate an increase in demand by a shift to the right, for example, from D1 to D2, okay? Now, what about a dramatic increase in the future price? Again, think demand now. So something that it's one of the favorite things you buy, the price is going to go up by 50% or 100%. It's going to double. If the price goes up by 100%, that's called doubling of the price. Well, people might go buy it now. They would view it right now, today's price. If it's going to go up in the future, today's price is almost like getting it on sale, right? So that's going to increase the demand now. An increase in demand may be graphically illustrated by a shift right of the entire demand curve. For example, from D1 to D2. Oop, I messed up there. There's another graph there still. From D1 to D2 in our 4D graph. So that's it, right? That's how you connect 3D to 4D. Now, change in demand, the 3 words, you got to shift the whole demand curve. Remember changing quantity demand from last video? The 4 words one, we stayed on the same demand curve. Okay, but there's the other variables, the basic list. Fancy companies, great marketing research companies are going to have an even more detailed list, for all the great products they have out there. But that's the basic list that we'll go through. So once more, I'm going to come behind. Thank you very much, you guys, for watching the videos, and I'll get some help with, hopefully Corsley's mom will be doing better, and Jake will be coming back as well, and we'll see you soon. But let me just do a quick review before we finish up here. Remember, once again, you guys, right, we're doing the graphs from the Cartesian plane geometry. Remember the 2 different number lines, horizontal and vertical ones stuck together. But we're only going to be doing quadrant 1 here, right, where the numbers are positive. And instead of Y, we're using price, and instead of X, we're using quantity. Here's one more time. You could put this on pause if you need it. The list of what some of the letters mean, right? Okay, sort of a reference list there. I'll leave it here for another second or two, but you'll have to put it on pause. I'm sure I'm going too quickly. And then once again, the Tommy strategy. I need you guys to get these basic terms down so that you get steps 1 and 2 done for me, and then I'll help you with the applications with the graphs and applying some of the more complicated stuff to get us going in an introductory way. So this is, apologize to the education majors, this is way too quick also, but a possible way to look at building the base, and the fact that much of even introductory economics is like a math or science class. A lot of it's at the applied level. Okay, everybody, see you next time, and thank you so much.